Folks, I am so excited to actually welcome for the first time on As the World Churns, Asawin Suebsaeng, who is a reporter at Rolling Stone, who I follow pretty much everything that you write. And your most recent piece is where I want to start today, which is can Dems save themselves by spending 20 million on, quote, speaking with American men or the SAM project, which is their attempt to win back, I'm assuming young, I would say 20, 30 something year old men who find themselves to be disaffected with the Democratic Party, that Donald Trump, through, I mean, this has honestly been a project of the right wing for well over a decade to kind of scoop up young men. So let us start there. What have you learned, Swin, about the SAM project?
I'll start things off on a personal note. I apologize to your listeners and viewers. You might notice this side of my face is drooping and completely pumped full of Novocaine, but I'm here. I'm here. I'm soldiering through it. So I'm going to talk as lucidly as I can right now. So, over the long Memorial Day weekend, the New York Times put out this larger story that had buried in it a brief detail. It was a rather eye popping detail. I'm sure many of your listeners saw it. I'm pretty sure you saw
Mhm.
it when it went
Mhm.
viral over the weekend. So it was just a few sentences dedicated to saying that one of these proposals that's floating out there in elite Democratic circles and among Democratic donors and optics is this $20 million fundraising effort, this
Mhm.
prospectus, this document. It's a short document. It's basically asking for money to fund a $20 million budget for something called SAM, obviously acronymed SAM, Speaking
Mhm.
with American Men. And one of the points of this project, according to the New York Times, was to study and understand the quote unquote syntax and different facets of these cohorts of young male voters in different communities, including online video game communities,
Mhm. Mhm.
who have, in recent years, and particularly in a very big way during the 2024 presidential election, drifted towards the right, specifically towards Donald Trump, Trumpism, and candidates and cultural movements like that.
Mhm.
So, as I think your viewers and listeners who aren't already aware of this can probably guess right now, this paragraph and a half or so was aggressively screenshotted in recent
Mhm.
and widely mocked in a variety of places online, including by alumni of Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, other Democratic operatives, left-wing podcasters, Fox.
It was mocked by myself. I
Yes.
mocked it on Blue Sky.
Fox News devoted at least one segment to it. Like it did indeed go viral, or at least semi-viral. But my editor Andrew Perez and I at Rolling Stone magazine, we thought to ourselves, well, wait a minute, this thing that a good number of people seem to be talking about, both on the left and the right, the New York Times story, while a very good story, didn't dedicate that much time to this, and
Mhm.
frankly, it didn't even say who was behind the project or what Sam was exactly. It
Mhm.
just had this like incredibly mockable snippet of the prospectus. So we went digging, calling and messaging around to a bunch of our Democratic and liberal sources to try to figure out who or what is Sam. That was the question on our mind in recent days. So we dug enough to figure out that two of the Democratic bigwig names who are
Mhm.
leading this effort and behind it. Other names are Elise Hogue, who
Mhm.
is the former head of NARAL and a longtime progressive activist and abortion rights activist,
Mhm.
and also a guy named John Della Volpe, who is a longtime director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics. He also was an advisor to Joe Biden's successful 2020 presidential campaign.
Mhm.
We also later learned that Colin Allred, who, of course, last year lost his Senate campaign to
Right.
Ted
True.
Cruz in Texas,
Yep.
is one of the, I believe, four principals involved with this project. So this is a real thing. It's not being run out of the DNC, but it's also far from a collective of nobodies. There's actual, like, mainstream Democratic elite juice and personas behind this thing.
I
So,
I like, I wanna say this because that's one of the things as I was reading your piece to figure out who was behind this, I think that that's what makes me so concerned. I moved from mocking, which I did when I first saw the piece in the New York Times, to concern that Democrats really have no idea how to just have conversations. That one of the things that I think that you would highlighted is wanting to create, quote, memeable content. Right? And, like, which says to me, it's almost as if, a parent trying to learn the slang of Gen Alpha and using it all incorrectly and just seemingly showing just how disconnected they really are. So t talk to us about how, through the research that you have done, like, what is it that who is it that they're really trying to reach, and what are the avenues that they're trying to use? Like, are they just going to try and cosplay what the right has done with the gaming and the manosphere and like the podcasts? Or is there something that they are innovating on and creating themselves?
well, it's at a very early stage because even though the project is off the ground, and for this Rolling Stone story you're talking about, we did end up being able to talk on the record to John and Elise, who are fronting the effort right now. And they want to make very clear this is the early stages. We're still raising money for this effort. The $20 million budget would be spread out over a 2 year period, and it would be devoted both to study and research and also what they call outreach and outreach communications to these communities. And to answer your question about what they're talking about, this is included but not limited to certain popular online spaces in
Mhm.
crypto, in
Mhm.
gaming, in popular how-to videos like do-it-yourself stuff on YouTube,
Mhm.
popular with a lot of young male voters, and, but spaces like that. And obviously, I don't think you or I are against Democrats or Democratic operatives or lawmakers of any stripe trying to do more outreach to
Mhm.
people in these spaces and communities, particularly young male voters, especially given the results of the 2024 presidential race.
Mhm.
What struck people as a little bit bizarre, including Democrats we spoke to who had recently received, before it had broken in the New York Times, a copy of this fundraising pitch, this
Mhm.
document, is that when they were reading it and seeing what these people were raising money for, it read to them as if you were trying to study young male voters and Gen Z
Yes.
disaffected, pro-Trump guys as if they're an alien species, as if
Yep.
you were on safari. And some Democrats who have been working, including in trying to do outreach to young voters for a long time, had quibbles with the very premise of thinking that $20 million is far too big a price tag for something like this, and that raising that amount of money for something like this risks draining funds or potential funding away from organizations and entities and people who they believe are actually doing the effective on the ground organic work of this type of stuff. And I want to go back to something you said earlier. I think you uh, mentioned that when you read about this stuff, both
Mhm. Mhm.
shown in the original New York Times story, it kind of reeked to you of elite Democrats trying to cosplay or reverse engineer
Yes. Yes.
something that actually happened for the most part, I think, organic.
Very organically. Yeah.
I actually raised this criticism or potential critique,
Uh-huh.
John and Elise, when we were talking on the phone, where one thought bubble I had was, okay, in concept, I don't necessarily, of course, see anything wrong with this, but I or someone else could argue, is this in a sense fighting the last war?
Mhm.
Not that, again, not to belabor the point, but not that it is a mistake to reach out to these or any other demographic. I think all political parties should be doing that across the spectrum. But for instance, growing up in the 1990s, all I heard over and over and over again in certain democratic and political spaces was liberals whining about, where is our Rush Limbaugh? Why don't
Oh
we
my
have
god, and now fast forward, where's our Joe Rogan?
exactly? And In terms of fighting the last war, when you're talking about the Republican Party, in the wake of their devastating losses to Barack Obama, the Republican Party, including then RNC chair Reince Priebus, commissioned that now famous post 2012 election autopsy.
Mhm.
What the right needs to do to start winning elections and presidential elections again. That includes we need to be nicer to immigrants, including the undocumented. We need to stop throwing out all these hardline, hyper draconian, ethnic cleansing style policy proposals. And it did not take that many years for a guy named Donald J. Trump to come along and crack the code to show them actually that is not the path to victory. Here's another one. So when I read about all these different proposals, not just the one from John and Elise about how we need to get better with all of the crypto spaces. We need to get better with young men who listen to Joe Rogan or the Nelk Boys or whatever. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with having that as a part of your mantra, but doesn't it kind of feel like you're fighting the last war?
Yeah, one, it feels like they're fighting the last war and also not actually getting to the core problem as to why these young men have found themselves looking to a Joe Rogan and a Donald Trump. Like, what has happened inside of our society, right? Where they are feeling isolated and they don't have the same opportunities that their parents once had and their grandparents once had.
Mhm,
Why that, like, talk about the rise in misogyny, right? And as a pushback to more women getting higher education degrees, having more financial autonomy, and all of these things. And what Donald Trump and that, like, toxic masculine set came in and said, no, bro, like, you can, like, get back to the top of the heap, the top of but this is how you're going to do it. You need a woman that's like a trad wife, right? Like, you need to pump more iron. You need to, like, assert yourself instead of trying to move along with these progressives and soften your language and, like, soften who you are. And I think that for me, when I read this, I'm just like, Democrats just, I talk about them being out of touch. And this to me is just like them solidifying the fact that over the last decade plus, you've really learned nothing. And you also continue to throw money at chasing people who actually don't want to hang out with you, rather than trying to figure out how to widen the base of people who do. And that to me is like the problem with this. But what ultimately with Hogue and the other co-leader of this project, what do they what are their hopes here? What are their hopes, being as how honestly they're decades behind behind the eight ball here?
they are hoping to get out of this studying level of outreach a roadmap for the National Democratic Party and its local and state affiliates to figure out a way to talk to and effectively message to both on a cultural and policy perspective to particularly young male voters who are aggressively drifting away from the Democratic Party right now, and to try to do it in a way that doesn't completely sacrifice bedrock, non negotiable democratic principles. Now, going back to something you mentioned earlier, one of the issues is that a lot of these younger male voters who really went for Trump in a big way late last year. And again, I'm saying a lot because this is by no means all of them. By
Mhm.
no means all of them. I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush or portray anything super simplistically here, but a really solid number of them went for Trump and guys like Trump because the right is offering them, as you laid out earlier, something that the Democratic Party simply can't. You can't really triangulate your way around offering up a liberalized version of Donald Trump's authoritarianism.
No.
Or at least you should if you want to be
Right, right.
more moral about it. When it comes to his zeal for ethnic cleansing and immigration crackdowns, you can try to triangulate on that, but that is something that very much the Democratic Party at least says, or oftentimes at least pretends to be very, very much against. And on your point on a lot of like the post Gamergate, I hate using the term culture war, but for whatever, we'll just use it right now. Culture war stuff. These are things that the opposition, which is currently, of course, the Democratic Party, is supposed to be fighting against.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about trying to appeal to younger men, you are I'm not saying this is a direct criticism of Sang specifically. I just mean broadly speaking.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
the large problem you're seeing with so much of the Democratic Party elite right now is that they are starting to fight that battle on the right wing's terms and on their
Yep.
terrain. You can see this with someone like Gavin Newsom in California, who you can tell just every time he speaks and every time he shows himself in public, he really, really, really wants to be president of the United States one day. And when he talks about trans issues, you can already hear him ceding the ground to the right and these quote unquote cohorts of young men who really don't like the idea of quote unquote trans athletes and just granting the premise of their argument and saying, oh, you're right about a lot of this. I think we need to adjust yourself to you. And if you do that, they're not going to start listening to you more than they would to a Donald Trump. You're just going to be ceding moral and political ground to them while they just say, well, the next time the election comes around, why would I vote for a guy like you when I can get the real thing? Opposed to a guy who's trying to emulate, at least in some respects, a right wing guy or a MAGA guy, such as the guy I'm going to end up voting for.
I mean, because the fact is, whether or not like we want to admit or agree, but the fact is, Donald Trump and MAGA are authentic about their misogyny and their xenophobia and their like all of the things that they don't mince their words, and they're not trying to pretend to be something that they're not. They've actually ripped the hoods off, right? In terms of the language that they use. And the reality is that Democrats still find themselves either being pulled further and further to the right in the desire to try and get a part of the population back that they're never going to get. And so they, like you said, very well, they are playing on the right's terms, using their language. I mean, you heard it from Slotnick the other day talking about we need more alpha males and more. I was like, what are you saying?
Well, to be fair, that totally worked during the 2004 presidential election when John Kerry got up there and tried to portray how much of a troop and how much of a badass allegedly and how tough he was. It definitely works when you start doing stuff like that. That's why George W. Bush was a one-term president.
Well, with that, we will have to leave it there. But I will say this, that it's just I appreciate the fact that you all did a deep dive into this and did more than a blurb for us to really understand. Frankly, I guess for me to understand that Democrats are in a lot more trouble than I had in that I even thought that we were in, right? And that to me is like, wow,
And to
where
your
do we really go from here?
And to your listeners and subscribers and viewers, if you want to go to rollingstone.com and check out the piece, they lay out their case, and then there are people who think it is a bad idea who lay out theirs. You can take a gander at it and decide
Mhm.
for yourself if this is as stupid as you might have initially thought it was if you were aware of the New York Times story. And also, the New York Times story, no offense to them whatsoever, but they do not include a copy of the prospectus, a quote of portion of which was my widely mocked, including by you on the internet. So, if out of curiosity, you guys would like to see
Yeah.
the whole thing for yourself, go to the Rolling Stone story, and we embed the whole thing at the bottom. You can read the entire document for yourself.
Swin, we appreciate you and hope to have you back again on As the World Churns very soon.
Thank you so much.